for me, I think my story is unique in some ways, but in some cases, in many ways actually, it is not a very unique story, because my story can be echoed by millions of other women, especially in Africa, and to be precise, sub-Saharan Africa. You heard a little bit of the introduction already, that I have known my HIV status since 1997. And just to give you a picture of what was happening at that time, women in Zambia, a country where there were about 12 million people, women could not taste without the permission of their husbands. And when I learned that, it almost just broke my heart. I said, how could this be? And here I was as a young woman who didn't have much education by that time, or, but I knew that something was missing. And I didn't know much about human rights or anything like that. But to me, I just thought, why should this be the case for women? And knowing what we know now, that women are definitely biologically vulnerable as well, and many of the doctors and the panelists we have here are even suitable to speak in those areas, but a lot of cultural barriers continued to put women in vulnerable position. And so when I tested HIV positive in 1997, I was told I'll only live for 6 months. Because really, without treatment, which seems to be said in far countries like the US, in Zambia at that time, it costed about $1,000 to have drugs every month. And here's a country where about 85% of the people live on live under poverty lines. And during that time, you were talking about 80% living on $1 a day. So meaning there weren't many people who were really going to have access to these drugs, or even knowing their own HIV status. And the group that was very much affected was women, as it was in my case. So really, I was determined to break the silence, the stigma that was attached to HIV and AIDS. And for me, I had that 6 months. I said, well, that's good. How can I help someone else become educated so that they don't get infected? How can I help those who are already living with the virus know that they can live positive with the virus, especially our women? So really, that was the beginning of my journey, because I thought I'll only live for 6 months. And I started within my own community, and little did I know that one day it would take me to the many corridors of power and many platforms, and even being in here in Perth. But also, I don't just know the reality of being infected with HIV. I know the reality of losing both of my parents due to HIV and AIDS, who died in 1993, and my father followed on very later. Again, I know we have just celebrated the International Women's Day. I'm just being reminded of how, when my mother was dying in 1993, all she could say is, "Princess, be strong and be of good courage, because I've looked around the family. You are the one to take care of your brothers and sisters." By that, she meant, not only will I have to fend for myself, but I have to fend for my 8 other siblings and cousins. And imagine not knowing where your next meal was coming from. It was a very difficult moment. Coming to where we are today, there has been some improvement in many cases, of which one of them I was graced to be part of the meeting in the White House in 2003 with former President of the US, and that led to $15 billion being passed. So a country like Zambia went from having only about 10,000 people being on treatment to about 250 people having treatment. Really, I'm sure we are going to get into the issues of how HIV impacts women on a very local level, on a very family level. But I think, to me, if I could summarize it, is that if we as women, and of course our few men who are in the audience, we do not personalize this issue, we do not put a gender lens on the issue of HIV, the cycle will continue, I believe, in countries like Zambia and many other places. And how do we ensure that that is on the agenda as we celebrate the 100 years, but also moving the way forward?